At the academy, lectures on death worlds were meant to scare new recruits. Holoscreens filled the hall with storms, swallowing cities, predators tearing prey apart, oceans that boiled one season and froze the next. The instructor's voice was calm, almost clinical, as he listed the dangers. But when the name Earth appeared on the screen, the tone changed. Unstable climate, predators in every biome, microbes that kill without warning, storms that erase entire settlements overnight. No cadet, the instructor said, could last a week there. The room buzzed with uneasy laughter. Alien cadets nudged one another, boasting how long they might last a few hours, maybe a day. Bets were whispered. No one glanced at the small, quiet human sitting at the back. He was soft-skinned, ordinary, forgettable, until he raised his hand. Then, explain me. The hall went silent, heads turned. For the first time, the cadets really looked at him. The scars on his arms, the calm in his face, the steady way he breathed. One cadet's voice cracked the silence. "You're from Earth?" The human only shrugged. "Where else?" And in that instant, Earth was no longer a legend on a screen. It was standing in the room with them, wearing human skin. The instructor, a long-limbed Arxen with dermal ridges that darkened under stress, blinked twice, genuinely caught off guard. "Your records state you are an exchange cadet from Sol Command, but Earthborn?" The human nodded once. "Born and raised, Minnesota." A long, slow exhale passed through the room, as if all the oxygen had been scooped up and thrown out the nearest airlock. Even the translator devices hesitated for a beat, trying to cross-reference a region that barely existed in alien databases. "Minnesota?" the Arxen instructor repeated with a stumble in tone. "Mid-continental, glacial zone," the human replied. "Winter frostbite in under 10 minutes if you don't know how to layer. Summers with humidity thick enough to swim through, mosquitoes the size of your thumbs." Laughter trickled at the edges of the crowd, nervous, thin. The instructor gestured to the hollow behind him. "You understand what Earth is classified as in council records?" The human nodded again. "Uninhabitable. Category 4 Death World." "We've read the same briefings, sir." Cadet Mern, a blue-skinned Rothari with branching ridges over his brow, muttered loud enough to be heard. "This is staged. He's pretending." Another chimed in, a clawed Nihilix, skeptical and sharp-eyed. "There's no way something that fragile survived that place. Look at him." "I am looking," someone else whispered. Because now that they were really seeing him, they saw things that didn't make sense. The scars weren't surgical, they were irregular, ragged, healed unevenly. One over his left eyebrow, another on his forearm like a bite had tried and failed to take the whole thing. There was a rigidness in how he moved his right leg, subtle, but there. Pain habituated, not eliminated. The instructor hesitated, then tapped a command into his interface. Verification requested, Cadet Jackson Reeve. Confirm planetary origin. The holo shimmered, then a new line blinked into existence. Identity confirmed. Origin, Sol III, Earth. Status, natural-born human. Earthborn classification, confirmed. Warning, planet of origin, classed, unsurvivable category 4 Death World. A few cadets physically stepped away. The Nihilix narrowed her eyes. "Your average for your species?" Jackson scratched his jaw, ignoring the tremble in her voice. "If I had to guess, pretty much." There was another pause, the kind that only comes when certainty shatters and a new shape begins to form in its place. A legend had entered the room, not as thunder, not as shadow, but as a man in uniform with a tired posture and an American accent. One cadet near the front blinked slowly. "You survived Earth, as a child?" Jackson exhaled a low laugh, genuine and dry. "That's how we all start." Mern stepped forward, indignant, trying to reclaim the mood. "Stories say Earth is the worst place the Council ever discovered. You're saying your people live there by choice?" "I'm saying we didn't get much of a vote. That's where we came from. So we adapted." There was something too steady in his voice, too casual, like a volcano explaining it once erupted, just because that's what volcanoes do. The instructor, who had been so sure of his curriculum 10 minutes ago, looked back to the Death World list. Acid winds, crushed cities, disease, monsters. Then back to the young man with the haunted gait and the half-healed scar down his arm. Adapted how? Jackson looked around, finally standing to address the room. Start with this: I broke my femur when I was 13. Snowmobile accident, full break. Had to wait 2 hours in -30 wind chill for the search team. No auto stims, no med vault. Just a snowbank and a torn-up jacket. He leaned on the edge of his desk, still calm. Then came surgery, rod in the leg, months of PT. It still aches when it rains, which on Earth is most days. A cadet winced. Another stared at his leg like it had just sprouted thorns. I had bronchitis 3 times before age 10, chickenpox at 7, cracked 2 ribs falling out of a tree trying to rescue a cat that ended up biting me anyway. That got infected. Took a week to heal. He tapped his chest. This scar? Skateboard accident. This one? Barbed wire. This one? I tried to pet the wrong raccoon. Someone coughed. The point is, he said, Earth's hard. It doesn't care if you're ready. You either learn how to keep going, or you don't. Silence. The instructor, to his credit, recovered enough to say, perhaps a demonstration is in order. Jackson raised one brow. Define demonstration. A controlled trial, the instructor said, to verify your claims of survivability. Fine. He stood straighter. Just don't make it boring. And just like that, the myth of Earth no longer belonged to diagrams and whispers. It had a name now. Jackson Reeve. Earthborn. Cadet. The following morning, the Academy's subterranean combat dome shimmered to life, not for drills or graded engagements, but for something far less routine. Word had spread like plasma fire through the ventilation system, not just through the cadets, but among junior instructors, staff physicians, and more than a few quiet, unlisted observers. A trial was called. Not for punishment, but proof. The arena would mimic Narkai 4, a death world known for its lethal temperatures, caustic spore clouds, and aggressive nocturnal wildlife. It wasn't Earth, of course, but it was the closest the simulation systems could allow on short notice. The cadets entered in staggered groups, 5 selected volunteers from different species. Mern the Rothari was first, armor sealed, filter system humming. His kind prided themselves on desert survival, thick hides, and redundant circulatory systems. Next came the Neolix, silent and coiled, her exosuit trimmed for agility. 3 others followed a Jiklan with pressurized boots, a tall Sitari in a bio-hardened dome helmet, and a green-hued Sori with triple-lensed eyes scanning the ceiling for threats. They were allowed custom gear, rations, medical patches, hydration units. Jackson was allowed his uniform. No weapons. When he stepped onto the platform, the cadets jeered not cruelly, but with the smug disbelief of someone watching a prey animal wander into a lion's den. Is that seriously what you're wearing? Mern asked, lifting his visor. Jackson looked down at the gray jumpsuit, then back up. I wasn't told to pack anything fancier. You'll be dead in the first hour. Jackson only blinked. That's the wager, isn't it? The instructor overseeing the event, Commander Hurrell, a crusty Zern with a cybernetic jaw, barked the rules. 6 cadets, 5 hours. Environment adjusted to level 6 hazard rating. Exit permitted at any time. Medical overrides in place. Trial ends with last cadet standing, or voluntary withdrawal. 5. He paused, eyeing Jackson like someone staring at a malfunctioning training drone. Begin. The floor shuddered. The dome's walls became a jungle, but not green and lively. More fungal, damp, low visibility, with acidic mist rising from the underbrush. Overhead, the artificial sky flickered orange, simulating a toxic dusk. The temperature rose instantly, not fatal, but deeply uncomfortable. Sweat prickled down Jackson's neck, almost immediately. The Rothari led the initial advance, thick boots crunching mold-covered roots. The Neolix vanished into shadow, her frame blending with the low light. The Sitari complained about humidity in his respirator. Jackson stayed still. He was watching the trees. The first hour passed with mild hazards. Spores clung to suits, triggering filter cycles. Mern swatted at heat wasps with a pulse blade. One cadet tripped and sliced a palm on alien thorns, nothing serious. just a surface wound, easily sealed with synthskin. At hour 2, the mist thickened. Visibility dropped to 6 feet. Movement in the trees. The Jiklin panicked first. Something had brushed against him. He swung wildly, yelling in his native clicks, slipped on a spore-coated vine, and rolled downhill into a shallow bog. The auto-recall system activated as soon as his breathing irregularities spiked. Blue light whisked him away mid-sputter. First out, the Centauri muttered. Should have stuck to his climate dome training. But the Centauri was next. Something scuttled along the canopy, dropped fast. Sharp claws. A shriek. He managed a single burst of plasma, missed before his left forearm was raked open. Blood everywhere. He screamed for extraction and vanished in a flash of light. The remaining cadets adjusted. Jackson hadn't moved from his perch under a twisted tree with leaves like knives. He was crouched low, breathing shallow. His skin had broken out in a rash along the forearms, probably from spore exposure, but he was ignoring it. More concerning was the slight wheeze that had started an hour and 20 minutes in environmental lung stress. He recognized the signs. Still, he stayed. At hour 3, the Sori cracked not from injury, but optics failure. The spores had coated his triple lenses, and his vision warped. Depth perception gone. He slipped, trying to climb a ridge, and twisted his ankle. Not a break, but enough. He withdrew before the predators caught his scent. That left 3. Myrn, the Nihilix, and Jackson. Myrn was in his element, mostly. The heat didn't bother him, but the spore buildup in his filters had started to gum the intake valves. He'd taken to stopping every few minutes to scrape the gunk off with a survival knife. The Nihilix had gone full stealth, but she was coughing now, dry and fast. Her breathing tube was narrowing from internal corrosion. Jackson? He was still upright. Shaky. Sweating buckets, definitely feverish, but still upright. Hour 4 brought the predators. Night cycle. 6-legged scavengers with heat-sensitive pits and serrated mouthparts dropped from trees and ran in darting spirals. The instructors dialed back the aggressiveness. This wasn't a death sentence, but it was close. Myrn fought the first wave, his pulse baton crackling. Killed 2 before one caught his thigh. It didn't go deep, but the biofluid loss triggered the suit's emergency sealant. He cursed loudly. "Still in," he yelled. "Still." Then collapsed. Not unconscious, but close. Extraction. The Nihilix was next blindsided, injured across her back. She tried to hide it, but blood trailed in luminous drips. One of the scavengers caught her scent and charged. She knifed it in the eye, but not fast enough. It tore her side open. Her scream was sharp, furious. She vanished mid-strike. Then there was one. Jackson stood alone in the rising fog, shirt torn across the ribs, a gash on his upper arm bleeding freely. Not arterial, he knew the feel of those, but enough to make his hand numb. He was shivering despite the heat, eyes unfocused. The predators circled, then stopped. Maybe it was his smell. Maybe it was the steadiness in how he turned to face them. Maybe it was that earthborn thing, not defiance exactly, but something deeper. The patience of someone who had already lost more blood, fought worse infections, buried people he knew. They didn't attack. They backed off. The environment dimmed. The trial ended. Jackson stumbled, didn't fall, and stood there swaying until Commander Hurl's voice crackled over the speaker. "Medical team, retrieve Cadet Reeve. Trial complete." The extraction light shimmered around him, and then he was gone. He woke 3 hours later in the Academy medbay, wrapped in saline-soaked gauze. 2 liters of fluid dripped into his arm. A bone scan ruled out any fractures, but the fever from spore exposure was real low-grade, but climbing. The gash had needed 16 sutures, cleaned manually due to allergic concerns with synthskin. The medical officer, a Tarian named Dr. Elis, looked at the chart, then at Jackson. "You shouldn't be alive." Jackson blinked, pupils sluggish. "That's not very comforting, Doc." "I mean that as a clinical observation," she said, adjusting the fluid flow. "Your O2 stats were borderline hypoxic, heart rate never stabilized. You had a minor allergic reaction to the spores and kept going. Why?" "Because I felt worse," Jackson muttered. Ellis frowned. When? He didn't answer, just looked at the ceiling with eyes that remembered something far colder, far lonelier. The door opened. Commander Hurrell stepped in, trailed by 4 senior instructors. Hurrell stared. You weren't supposed to win. Jackson gave a faint, exhausted smile. Then, explain me. By the next midday cycle, Jackson was walking again stiffly, favoring his right side, the bandages on his arm clean but obvious. Dr. Illis had fought to keep him under full observation for another 12 hours, citing infection risk and mild dehydration. He'd promised to return the moment his legs stopped wobbling. He lied. 2.5 hours later, he limped back into the main hall, where the instructor had first declared Earth uninhabitable. The room quieted the moment he stepped through the entrance. No jeers this time, no smug bets, just silence. A room full of aliens who had seen something they didn't have words for yet, who now realized the lecture on death worlds hadn't ended, it had just grown legs. The instructor from before, the Arxan named Lutar, nodded stiffly. You've interrupted my schedule, Cadet. Jackson raised his brows. Sorry. Thought the class might like a follow-up. Lutar hesitated, then stepped back. The floor is yours. Jackson walked to the front. No need for a hollow display, just him, his voice. I'm not here to brag, he began. I don't think there's anything special about me. Some students looked away. That was the part that frightened them most. He nodded toward the wall, where the list of death worlds still hovered. You want to know how we survive Earth? I'll tell you, but you won't like the answer. He pointed at the screen. Unstable climate? I've seen storms flip trucks, rip the roof off houses, flood highways in minutes, but we don't run from it, we build for it. Reinforced basements, weather alerts, community shelters. We don't stop the storm, we learn how to live around it. He turned to face the crowd. You think the predators make it unlivable? Bears, mountain lions, saltwater crocodiles? Sure. But we didn't grow up expecting safety. We grow up learning situational awareness, camping with noise discipline, spray deterrence, knowing when to back away slow and when to climb the damn tree. Lutar's mandibulous face remained unreadable. Jackson kept going. Microbes? Diseases? My generation lived through a pandemic before we hit puberty. Masks, isolation, vaccines, missed birthdays, lost people. Then came antibiotic-resistant infections. We adapted, not by evolving claws or venom, but with planning, with science, with public health campaigns and hand sanitizer in every pocket. A few cadets fidgeted, uncomfortable. Here's the real secret, Jackson said, his voice leveling out. Earth's not hostile because it hates us. It's hostile because it doesn't care. The planet's been spinning for billions of years without us, and it'll keep spinning long after we're gone. He looked around the room. That's what makes Earth different. It didn't shape itself to support us. We had to shape ourselves to survive it. One of the younger cadets raised a hand, a Nefari with delicate gill lines along her neck. But why stay? Why not evacuate? Relocate your whole species? Evacuate? Jackson repeated, half smiling. There are over 8 billion of us, spread across every climate imaginable. Tundra, desert, rainforest, you name it. And we've built cultures, languages, cities' roots. You don't just rip that up and start fresh. Earth is home, even when it tries to kill you. A beat passed. Mern, freshly bandaged and sitting stiffly 2 rows back, stood up. He looked tired, humbled. You're telling us that your species lives in constant adaptation, that your entire civilization is built on enduring the impossible. Jackson nodded. Pretty much. And what happens when something truly catastrophic hits, something that makes the worst storm look like a breeze? We grieve, then we rebuild. No one laughed. A tall Brixari near the back finally asked what everyone was thinking. If you're average, what does your peak look like? Jackson tilted his head. You ever seen a firefighter run into a burning building because a kid screamed from inside? A few shook their heads. Or surgeons operate for 16 hours straight, even when their hands cramp, because someone's heart won't keep beating without them? Still, no response. We have people who run into hurricanes to rescue strangers, who mine coal in collapsible shafts, because that's the only job feeding their families, who hike frozen mountains for sport, climb cliffs without ropes, free dive into underwater caves for the challenge. He shrugged again, not dismissive this time, but honest. I'm not even in the top 50%. That's when the silence turned. No longer disbelief, not quite reverence, but something heavier. Like looking at a creature that should have broken long ago and realizing it's still standing simply because no one told it not to. Instructor Lutar stepped forward. Then, what are we to make of this, Cadet Reeve? That the galaxy's most feared death world has not just survivors but volunteers? Jackson nodded. Yeah, and you've only met one of us. The screen behind him flickered. Quietly, a new line of text appeared under Earth's listing. Updated classification, origin of humanity approach with caution. Nobody laughed. By the next cycle, Earth was no longer a warning label in a lecture. It was a subject of study, and Jackson Reeve had become a walking syllabus. Instructor Lutar announced a new seminar, Adaptive Resilience in Hostile Environments, Human Case Study. Attendance was optional. The lecture hall was over capacity before he finished the sentence. Cadets brought notepads, sensor arrays, translation filters, anything to decode the anomaly sitting on the stage. Jackson didn't seem to enjoy the attention. He tugged at his collar more than once, winced when he stood too quickly, and still walked with a limp that stubbornly resisted the medbay's best tissue regenerators. Lutar began the session with a projection of Earth's biosphere, the shifting jet streams, tectonic fault lines, oceanic currents, seasonal wildfires. Statistically, he said, this planet should not be a cradle of intelligence. Jackson snorted. It tried not to be, we just kept going anyway. Lutar gestured toward him. Which is why today's topic concerns the human threshold for suffering and recovery. A murmur ran through the crowd. This wasn't about endurance, this was about pain. Jackson took the mic. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. We break. All the time. It doesn't take much. One bad step on ice, you've got a sprained ankle. Land wrong after a fall, that's a torn ligament. We don't have exoskeletons, redundant hearts, or regenerative tissue. He paused. But what we do have is time, and stubbornness. Lutar nodded. Explain. Okay. When I was 15, I fell during a hiking trip, fractured my right wrist. Simple break. We splinted it with a stick and duct tape, hiked 8 kilometers back to camp, waited 6 hours for evac. Once in the hospital, they reset the bone and cast it. No shortcuts. 6 weeks immobilized, 2 more weeks of physical therapy, just to get full motion back. One cadet raised a tendril. You were out of commission for nearly 2 months for a single fracture? Jackson nodded. That's average. Another asked, you accepted that level of impairment? Jackson raised both brows. What's the alternative? We're not built to heal fast. We're built to adapt while we heal. Lutar cut in. Define that. Jackson scratched the back of his head. We use tools, modify our environment. Crutches, braces, slings. We compensate for weakness, build around it. The pain doesn't stop, so we learn to live with it while we work to get better. Dr. Illis stepped forward from the back of the hall, arms folded. She'd followed his recovery closely, and now she spoke as part of the lecture. When Cadet Reeve arrived in Medbay post-trial, he was running a fever of 101 degrees Fahrenheit, with mild tachycardia, borderline dehydration, and a soft tissue laceration overlying the left deltoid muscle. He declined full sedation. He remained conscious during debridement. A few cadets visibly shuddered. One whispered, "Debridement? Awake?" He remained cooperative, Illis said, tense, but lucid. When I asked why he wouldn't allow anesthesia, he said, and, I quote, "She looked at Jackson." He sighed. "Because I didn't want to miss lunch." Now, the room did laugh nervously, awkwardly, but laughter all the same. Jackson held up a hand. "Look, I'm not saying that was smart, but it's part of how we cope. Humor, distraction, focus on the next thing. Sometimes the pain doesn't leave, so we outwait it." Illis added, "The sutures are healing slower than we'd prefer. His species does not form regenerative clots the way some of yours do. Scar tissue is forming already. Full recovery? I'd estimate another 10 days before he regains normal range of motion." And you'll continue training during that time? Lutar asked. Modified drills, Jackson said, lower impact. But you will train. He nodded. Of course. The instructor tilted his head. Not because you're required, because you choose to. Another nod. That stuck with them. That the pain wasn't disqualifying. It wasn't a barrier to respect. It was the price of doing anything at all. Later, during break, Jackson sat with a few of the more curious cadets. Myrn joined him with a translator tablet. You said you've survived viruses, predators, blunt trauma, and surgical recovery. What happens when it's mental? Jackson didn't answer right away. He tapped the table, once, twice. Then it gets harder, he said quietly. Because pain you can see is easier to manage than the stuff in your head. The Neelix cadet, sitting across from him, leaned in. And how do humans survive that? Jackson thought for a moment. By talking, or not talking. By working, or resting. Depends on the person. But the main thing? We look out for each other. One person might crack. But if someone else notices steps in it, keeps the whole thing from falling apart. He looked up at them. Resilience isn't just about muscles and lungs. It's community. It's knowing that someone, somewhere, is stubborn enough to drag you back from the edge. Even the translator unit softened the tone on that one. And now, in addition to fear and admiration, there was something else forming in the eyes of the cadets around him. Recognition. Maybe even understanding. Because the myth of Earth had never explained how humans coped with what couldn't be fought, healed, or outrun. Now, they were learning. And it changed everything. 3 days later, the council delegates arrived. Not for disciplinary review as some suspected, but for observation. Word of the trial had reached higher channels. It was one thing to study death worlds from orbit. It was another to find a species that had walked one for millennia and lived to talk about it. The delegation included 3 envoys, a Darren philosopher with respiratory translators braided into her robes, a Violic strategist who logged every word onto a private tablet, and a towering red-scaled Kroshek who asked no questions but never blinked once during the briefing. Jackson wasn't told until 15 minutes beforehand. He was sitting on the Academy's secondary gym mat, wrapping his still-healing arm in fresh compression tape when Lutar entered the room. They want to meet you, the instructor said. Jackson exhaled slowly through his nose. To congratulate or interrogate? Lutar gave him an unreadable glance. Both. The council chamber wasn't like the lecture halls. No screens, no ambient drones, just a raised semicircular table and 3 empty chairs facing it. The envoys arrived shortly after Jackson took his seat. Dr. Illis sat behind him, just in case. Not just for medical reasons, though she carried a medkit. But because someone needed to be there who had watched the human bleed and struggle and shake and still refuse to rest. The Darren envoy spoke first. We have reviewed the incident, Cadet Reeve, the trial, the aftermath, the modifications to Death World classifications. He nodded. Sounds right. The Violic envoy didn't look up. You submitted yourself to a known lethal environment without enhanced gear or medication. Why? Jackson rested both hands on the desk. Because you didn't believe me. That is not standard Academy procedure. No, it's not, he agreed. But neither is calling my entire species a biological accident. That silenced them for a moment. The Kroshek envoy finally spoke, voice like metal scraping under pressure. You do not look like a predator. Jackson tilted his head. I'm not. You are not armored. Nope. You cannot regenerate. No. You heal slowly, break easily, require complex emotional support systems. Your lungs are inefficient. Your eyes are vulnerable to ultraviolet overexposure. Your blood clots erratically. You admit to frequent illness. You feel pain acutely and recover slowly. He nodded along. All true. The Kroshek narrowed his gaze. Then why do you survive? And there it was. The question behind every stare, every scan, every whispered conversation in the dormitories. Why? Jackson took a breath. Because pain is just another problem. He sat forward. We don't ignore it, we don't override it, we don't enjoy it, but we learn from it, we anticipate it, and when we can't, we endure it together. He let that hang there. My friend Marcus, his sister died in a mudslide when their town got 20 inches of rain in 2 days. He didn't eat for a week. Then he organized a volunteer team to rebuild the neighborhood. He glanced at the Violic. My cousin broke his pelvis falling through a rotted staircase. Took 4 surgeries, 1 year on crutches. Now he teaches structural safety courses in low-income housing zones. Back to the Kroshek. My mother worked as an ER nurse, ran triage through 3 different epidemics. One Christmas, she came home after a 36-hour shift with a broken finger wrapped in medical tape and said, "If I don't cook dinner, your father will poison us all." And she did, limped the whole time. He leaned back, calm now. It's not about being better, or tougher, or lucky. It's that we're really, really hard to get rid of. The room stayed quiet for a long moment. Then the Darren envoy said softly, "We believed Earth was a mistake, a planet that made life by accident and forgot to stop killing it." Jackson smiled faintly. "That's probably fair. But now, we see it differently." Her eyes met his. It wasn't a mistake, it was a crucible. When Jackson left the chamber, the students waiting outside didn't swarm him. They just stood back, quiet, like witnesses to something sacred. Later that week, the lecture on death worlds was rewritten. Earth was still listed, but now it was under a different section. Cradle of adaptation. Category, not recommended for first contact. Species of note, humans, non-dominant physiology, high resilience culture. Engage with consideration. On the final page of the new module, there was a quote. "We're not built to heal fast, we're built to adapt while we heal." Cadet Jackson Reeve, Earthborn. The academy moved on, as it always did. Classes resumed, simulations rebalanced, cadets returned to drills and tactics. But things had changed. They invited Jackson into study groups. Not for novelty, for advice. They wanted to know how to recover after field failure, how to treat emotional wounds with as much urgency as burns, how to manage panic when the air is too thin or the pain too loud. 1 week after the trial, Myrn approached him with a request, a training course. "Not in combat," Myrn clarified. "In coping." "In coping." Jackson stared. "We have all the strength, all the reflexes, but we're brittle when it breaks. You aren't." So he taught them. Simple things at first. Breathing under pressure, grounding exercises. How to measure pain without panic. When to ask for help. How to offer it. He didn't quote philosophers or ancient earth sages. He quoted his mom. He quoted his middle school gym coach. He quoted his first aid handbook from summer camp. Because that was the real core of it. Humanity didn't thrive because of superweapons or perfect genes. It thrived because kids learned early how to bandage a wound, say, "I'm not okay," and still show up the next day. 3 weeks later, Jackson returned to the medbay for a final checkup. Illis scanned the scar on his arm, still pink, but closing cleanly. "You'll have full range of motion back by next week," she said. Jackson rotated his shoulders slowly. "You were right about the scar tissue." Illis gave him a rare smile. "Scars are just records of where we've been." "On Earth," he said, "they're like ID cards." She handed him the updated file. "Cleared for full activity." As he stood, she asked, "What are you going to do next?" He looked out the window, toward the artificial training horizon and the rows of cadets running drills under the pale blue dome. "I'm going to help them understand pain." Elis tilted her head. "To prevent it?" He shook his head, smiling. "To survive it." In time, Earth would fade from the center of the curriculum. The cadets would graduate. Some would serve on cold moons, others on gas giants with gravity too dense for breath. But none would forget the day a small, forgettable human raised his hand and rewrote the legend of an impossible world. He had no claws, no armor, no venom. Just grit. And enough scars to prove it.